Hello guys, welcome to today's photograph training. In this video, I'm going to show you guys two parts. The first part is some parameters of photograph. And the second part is the composition. I think this is very important for you, especially for beginners to know this knowledge, to help you to get some more creative, more interesting images, to help you to get the exposure right, to get some effects, something you like. So let's just get it started. Photograph training, basic part is basic parameters. The second part is composition. Let's talk about the first part, basic parameters of cameras. This is not only some basic parameters of cameras, but also some basic parameters in photography, in shooting. So it is very important. I hope you can get some ideas from this. The first one is shutter speed. And aperture, we do not normally use this one. We use f-stop more often. And ISO and focal length. These four things, these four parameters is very basic to use in your daily shooting. First thing I want to talk about is what exposure. I open camera raw. Let's wait a minute. I just open camera raw and we can see this is exposure. Exposure means the brighter or darker of your image. So normally when we take a photo, we hope it can get exactly or right exposure that we want. Sometimes you take a photo, you can say it is overexposure, or sometimes it is darker. That is not what we want. So we want to control the exposure. It is exactly what I want. So this is the exposure. And let's go back to my PPT. The first part is shutter speed. What is shutter speed? Shutter speed is one of the most important settings in photography alongside the aperture and ISO. So shutter speed is exactly what it sounds like, the speed at which the shutter of the camera closes. So the shutter speed gives you two things. One, it lets you freeze the time, and two, it controls the exposure. We have some forms of shutter speeds. Also, this is the number of shutter speed. One shutter speed is measured in fractions of a second. On most cameras, it appears as a whole number. So, and it's equal to or longer than 1 second. You should see one double quotation marker like this. It means shutter speed is 1 second. So the exposure time is 1 second. It means also when you press the shutter speed button and then you have to wait 1 second to get your image. And this turn without this marker here, it means the shutter speed is 1/10 of a second, and 500 it means 1/500th of a second. Sometimes when you use your phone in your pro mode, you can control your shutter speed. It maybe sometimes it's like this is your shutter speed, and sometimes when you use your cameras, you will say this form and this form, but these two forms are exactly the same thing. It means the shutter speed is for 1/400th of a second. What can be used shutter speed? So we'll show you guys two examples. The first example is a faster shutter speed. Sometimes you want to shoot sports or fast moving cars, you highly recommend you use fast shutter speed. Sometimes maybe higher than 1/500th of a second or something like that. And so you can get a clean image of a subject that would otherwise be blurred. If your shutter speed is not enough, so you will get sometimes your image would be a little bit blur, motion blur. So it is not very clear. And it also controls the exposure because it is daytime. So you don't need to slow down your speed to get more exposure, to get more lights in. Sometimes when we're in night, if you want to get this kind of effects, these light trails, the trails of the light, you have to slow down your shutter speed. And also your shutter speed is very slow, so you will get more light in. And then you will get the right exposure in night. And the next part is aperture. What is aperture? Aperture actually controls the amount of light that enters your camera. In DSLR cameras, the aperture is an actual physical opening in lens. It is in lens. Aperture is in lens. This means you can buy lenses with different aperture ranges. This is the key point I want to say. On your smartphone, the camera aperture is fixed using software to add blur and depth of field. So when you use your phone, you will see sometimes it has two cameras, or maybe some dual cameras or 3 or 4 cameras, but each camera, they have the fixed aperture. which means that their aperture is like this part in your lenses, and you can see this opened widely and this is open narrowly. At the same time, this one will get more light in because it opened widely than this one, right? So the aperture controls the light. It is physical, but it is not very important because we don't pay attention. We don't pay so much attention to aperture. We pay more attention to f-stops. This is more important than aperture. This calls f-stops. This form is like this, f1.4 and f1 2.0 and f2.8, something like this. What this means, f-stops, sometimes called f-numbers, are a measure of how large the opening of the aperture is. This shows how large the opening of your aperture. So they are determined by the ratio of the aperture's diameter to the focal length of a lens. This isn't a matter at all. So we don't need to know this. The higher of the f number, the smaller aperture opening. You just need to remember this one. This one is very important. Yes. The higher of the f number, the smaller the aperture opening. When you use the smaller number of your f-stops, it will use large opening aperture. What can we use this? This also controls two things. Aperture also controls two things. First one is exposure, and the second one is the depth of field. So in this image, we can see exactly what it will affect the depth of your field. Sometimes when you see some images, you can see your subject is very clear, but the background is a little bit blurred. The blur is sometimes it is more blur, sometimes it is less blur. So the aperture controls the blur. How much this f numbers from f1.4 to f32. We can see this is our subject, and the background is becoming more and more clear. So if we want to get the shallower depth of field, we call this blurred background is depth. We call it depth of field. So the smaller of the f number you get, the more light you will get in. This is the first thing we talked about before. And the second one is the more blur will be in ground. So if you use a smaller number, it will be more blur in your background. I'm going to show you guys some examples of using f-stops. So the first image is when I take this picture, I use f1.8. f1.8 is very small, but it means your aperture is a large opening. So you will get a shallower depth of field. But in this image, I use f16. f16 is very bigger than 1.8. So you will get more clear in every part of your image. So this is the deep depth. This is deep depth of field. So in these two images, we can conclude some rules or some tips maybe I can share with you guys. When you want to focus on the subject or want some really beautiful blurred background, you should use small f number. When you take some landscapes, when you go to some scenarios and you want to take some pictures of mountains, skies, or sea, so you would like to use some bigger f number because you will get every part of your image clear. You want the whole image is clear. You should use big f number. And the third part is ISO. What is ISO? Originally, ISO numbers were set by the International Organization for Standardization, where the name ISO comes from, to refer to the sensitivity of the film in a camera to light. And this is not important. This is just the definition of ISO. ISO standards in digital photography today still have the same numbering system to indicate the sensitivity of a digital camera sensor to light. So what does this mean? If you use, normally speaking, this two sentence or definition is not important at all. We can see this image here. When I use my phone in pro mode, we can see there we have some we can control our ISO. I will play this video. I increase my ISO. You can see this image is becoming brighter and brighter. Becoming brighter and brighter. Okay. So what does this mean? This means ISO controls the exposure as well. We talked about the exposure before. Shutter speed can control the exposure, and the aperture or f-stop can control the exposure. And ISO also can control the exposure. So these three parameters will control the exposure indirectly. Also, it means that you can see this is the camera here. This is the image sensor. The image sensor, when your lights get through the lenses and then hit into the image sensor, sometimes your environment is very dark, but the image sensor can magnify your digital signal. This ISO indicates the sensitivity of digital camera sensor to light. So if you use high ISO, the image sensor will be more sensitive to light, so you will get more exposure at the same time. But what can we lose, or something we get something and we lose something? This is the word is equal, right? So the ideal ISO number allows your camera to achieve good image quality by letting the right amount of light hit the image sensor. In brighter light, especially in your daytime, you should use lower ISO. Is best because the lower ISO values are better in well-lit sceneries. So what this means, conversely, when less light is available, you need to higher ISO to compensate. Because I showed you guys in the first before, if you set high ISO, you will get brighter. Your image will get brighter, right? High ISO can increase your camera's light sensitivity, which is ideal for low light situations, but it will give you a lot of noise if you set a really high ISO. We can see this in this image, ISO 50, ISO 100, ISO 200, ISO 400, and up to 2200, 4800. So we can see this really high number here, but also we can see the image, it will have a lot of noise. So if we use higher ISO to get more brighter, to get the image brighter, that's very, very useful for us. But also sometimes it brings a lot of noise to our image. So when we use our phone or cameras, we'd better set our ISO as lower as possible. What is the focal length? The focal length is the optical distance, usually measured in millimeters, from the point where the light meets inside the lens to the camera sensor. So this focal length is your lens, the angle of your lens, the angle of your lens that it can get the perspective or the things. So when you see camera lenses with a short focal length, such as 18 millimeters, your resulting photo has wider angle view. Lenses with longer focal lengths, such as 200 millimeters, gives you narrow angles of view. 200 millimeters is very, very long lenses, and it will see very far. So this image will show you exactly what this means. So if you use 17 millimeters, your angle, you take a picture. This is your angle. You can see this part all the way to this part, all the things in this angle. But you use some really bigger, sometimes you can say 600 millimeters lenses, you will get a narrower view and of your angle, and you will see very, very far. And the importance of focal length. Sometimes when you buy your lenses or using lenses, you can see these parameters here, 70 to 200 millimeters. This means it can change from 70 millimeters to 200 millimeters. It means you can use this lens, you can see or capture images of this angle all the way to this angle. But sometimes you can see in the right image, we have these phones here. It has 3 cameras. Yes, every camera, it has a fixed focal length. So it has 3, maybe this one is wider angle, this one is telephoto cameras, and this one is a normal lens. When you use your phone, you can switch from this camera to this camera and then to this camera. So example of you using focal length. When we use 24 millimeters, we can see we can capture all of the things in our picture at once. And we use 50, it will narrow our angle millimeters. And when we use 85 millimeters, it will become narrower or more narrow. So changing focal length can change the game. Photographing a live event is a great way to understand how focal length affects your phone. It shows you will be moving around the event, looking for that perfect angle, and sometimes you will need to change focal length to make the most of the opportunities. And the next one is exposure. We talked about that before. The shutter speed, the aperture, also at the f-stops, and the ISO, the three parameters, they can also control the exposure. So the way that photos are created is related on an exposure triangle controlled by three major settings. The shutter speed controls how fast or slow your shutter speed or your shutter closes, affecting the time of exposure and helping you freeze motion properly. And ISO is used to indicate the light sensitivity of film or adjust the light sensitivity of a digital camera sensor. And photographers adjust it based on their surroundings. F-stop controls the amount of light that it can get during exposure time. The smaller number you use, the more light you will get, the more exposure your photo would be. So let me make it clear. Shutter speeds, it means the time of the exposure. F-stop means if you use a smaller number of f-stops, at the same time you will get more light in. And if you use ISO, it means the image sensor will be more sensitivity to the light, so it will also be brighter. So these three things will control the image exposure at the same time. So we can say this image all the way, again, smaller number, slow shutter speed, bigger ISO number will give you more exposure. So you can say this narrow direction here. You don't need to worry about that. Most of the time, the cameras or the phones will control the exposure automatically. It will decide our aperture, f-speed, shutter speed, or ISO based on the situation. So we don't have to set it manually. Depth of field is one of the best known photograph techniques. It relates to which elements in the image are in or out of focus. We're talking about that before. The blurred background, which is the depth of field. Shallower depth of field puts your subject in sharp focus and blurs the background or foreground. This is set by wide aperture. So here's the question. If you want to get a wide aperture, what you should use? Your f-stops. If it means you use small f-stops. Deep depth of field keeps everything in the frame in equal focus. This is depth by narrow aperture. So we're talking about this before, depth of field. If you want to get a blurred background, we should use smaller f numbers. So this blurred effects, we can see this is dramatic and very, very interesting. But the aperture is not the only factors that control the depth of field. We have two other parts that can control the depth of field. We want to get we have three factors of shallower depth. The longer your focal length, the shallower your depth of field. So if you use your very, very long lenses, has very longer focal length, you will get a very beautiful depth of field. So I can't take close to this dragonfly because when I close to it, it will fly away. So when I take this picture, I use really longer focal length. It is maybe almost like 200 millimeters. You don't need to close to it. You will get some. You will take some effects like this, and you will get a shallower depth of field. The second part is we're talking about before is f-stops. With smaller f-stops, you will get more depth of field. You will get a shallower depth of field. And the third part is increase the distance between the camera and your subject and your background. So what does this mean? If you get close to your subject, when you take your photo, you get close to your subject, you will get more blurred background. When you move away from your subject, you will get less blurred background. So when you want to get some really blurred background, you need to get close to your subject. This is your subject, and this is you, and you use your phones, your cameras, you get close to it, and you will get a blurred background. And also you can move away your background from your subject. This will also cause a very blurred background. And the next part is composition. Finally, what is composition in photograph? The major composition is about the way different parts of your images, your photos are positioned and the way they fade together. For instance, these are all common composition questions. Where should I put my subject? Would I include 2 people or 3 people in the frame? Should I include a lot of the sky or a lot of foreground? Should I cut off a person's limbs? Where should I position the horizontal? All of this kind of questions is about composition. So when you take a photo, you will also use the composition. So what can we do with it? So rules are, well, I'm going to show you guys some basic rules of composition. But this is the rules is just some reference for you. You don't have to strictly follow the rules, but I hope it will give you guys some ideas. Let's talk about this. These are the rules of thirds. The rule of thirds is a way of dividing frames for optimal composition. It involves evenly dividing the frame between two equally spaced horizontal and vertical grid lines, creating a 3x3 grid. So what does this mean? You can see these three by 3 grid. When you take some pictures, you can put your subject or things along this line. Sometimes you can also put your subject in this corner because you can see this line, they crossed here. You can put your subject here. You can put your subject here. Also here is also okay. So you get an example. You can put your images into this line. This is the 2/3 part of the image here. You can put it along this line here. And the second part is symmetry. Symmetry is by including symmetry in your composition, you can create a sense of boldness and power. Note that it's impossible to use many different types of symmetry, including radical symmetry and vertical symmetry, and also horizontal symmetry. You can see in this image, it is this part and this part, they are symmetry along this line. You can see this is the symmetry. Sometimes you can use when you take some photos, you can use exactly the same thing. You can use it as a vertical symmetry or horizontal symmetry. It is based on you. The third rule is the golden ratio. The golden ratio used a particular number 1.618 to create visually pleasing, balanced, dynamic compositions in photography. The golden spirals uses the ratio to create a pleasing spiral that you can use to position different compositions elements. So sometimes you can put your subject in this part because this is the golden ratio. You can also put your image, your subject along this line. This is just the reference. You don't have to strictly follow this. This is just give you some ideas where you take your images, you make your own composition. So like this one, I was just gonna put my subject into this part, so it will give you guys some, more dramatic things or something you need to think about. It will make it more interesting. The fourth one is triangles. What is triangles? Triangles means keep things interesting while making sure the composition is stable. Note that you can find triangles all over the place, including symmetric triangles, scalar triangles, and implied triangles. And by including these different triangles in your images, you can create slightly different effects. Oh, this is very long, but we don't have to remember. We don't have to remember this sentences here. We're just showing you guys examples. We can see in this image, this bridge, or maybe this reel is divided this image into two parts. We can see this is a triangle, right? This is also a triangle. And in this image, we can see this tree to this bears, and to this bear, polar bears, we can say this is also a triangle. So the triangle method, the triangle rules is not dead. You can use it by your own. Sometimes you can use it to divide your photo. You can use it to make your some focused things like this. The next one is the rules of space. What is the rules of space? When you put some space in front of a moving subject and also in front of a gazing subject, also in front of a gazing subject, when this person looks this way, right? So you'd better you'd better give a little bit more space in this part. If you give it more space in this part, you can imagine that this is really weird, right? It is also like this one. When this flower is stretched in this way, you can say, you should give it a little bit of space in this way, but if you give a lot of space in this way, it will feel a little bit weird. So when you take a car or moving subject let me make an example for when a car moving to this way, you'd better put some more space in front of it, right? So this is the rule of space. And also we can use another rules, maybe fill the frame. What is the fill the frame? Fill the frame, not all compositions benefit from your filling the frame with your main subject. You can often create stronger, more impactful images by really getting up close and making sure the subject takes up the whole shot. So sometimes you can use a fill the frame. You can use your subject to fill all your frame and to make it more stronger, to feel more stronger like this, and more stronger and more focused on your subject. All photograph compositions for beginners is a learning exercise. These tips and techniques are a starting point. There's certainly more to know and more things to think about. But from here, you have the basic idea. The only way to master any art form is to practice it, right? And the way to practice is to keep in mind these rules and try them through different angles and locations. You will know if a rule is working or not, but these rules are dead. You don't need to follow them strictly. You can do the composition in your own way. And just you need to take a practice and find your own composition based on the situation. Every situation has different compositions. It is up to you. Okay, conclusion. Let's make the conclusion. All of the knowledge is just helping you to get quick access to this journey, but you have to keep thinking and trying. The most important part thing is no matter what equipment you will use, going out and taking photos with all your passion is the key point. So this is today's photograph training. Thank you so much.